The police officer looked tired. That was the first thing I noticed when I opened my childhood bedroom door and saw him standing in our front hallway holding a manila folder thick with paperwork. My name was Steve Morrison, and at 26 years old, I never imagined I'd be packing my belongings while my parents screamed accusations at me from downstairs. $15,000 had vanished from Morrison & Sons Building, our family construction company, and according to everyone who mattered, I was the thief who took it during my night shift managing the company books. 3 days before that devastating moment, I was living what I thought was a pretty decent life. I had been working at Morrison & Sons Building for 2 years since graduating from State University with my business degree. The company my grandfather started in 1972 had grown into one of the most respected construction firms in our county, specializing in commercial buildings and government contracts. My father, Robert Morrison, ran the operation with an iron fist, while my mother, Linda, handled the administrative side when she wasn't busy doting on my younger brother, Jake. Jake had joined the business 6 months earlier, fresh out of college with a degree he barely earned thanks to his fraternity connections and our parents' financial contributions to his professor's research projects. At 24, he possessed the kind of natural charm that made people forget his lack of actual skills or work ethic. While I spent my evenings reconciling accounts and preparing payroll reports, Jake schmoozing clients at expensive restaurants and golf courses, always on the company credit card. The missing money discovery happened on a Tuesday morning during Dad's monthly audit. I remember walking into the main office around 7:30, coffee in hand, ready to tackle another day of balancing budgets and processing contractor payments. The atmosphere felt different immediately. Dad sat hunched over the computer terminal, his face pale and drawn, while Mom paced behind him, wringing her hands. $15,000, Dad announced, without looking up from the screen. Gone from the main operating account? The transfer happened sometime between Monday evening and Tuesday morning. My stomach dropped. As the company's financial manager, any discrepancies in our accounts fell under my responsibility. I pulled up my login records on a separate computer, scanning through every transaction I'd processed in recent weeks. Everything appeared normal, properly documented with the required authorization codes. Jake arrived an hour later, strolling through the office doors with his usual confident swagger. He wore an expensive suit our parents had bought him for client meetings, complete with Italian leather shoes that cost more than most people's monthly car payments. His perfectly styled brown hair and practiced smile seemed inappropriate for the tense atmosphere surrounding us. "What's all the commotion about?" Jake asked, settling into his office chair with theatrical concern. Dad explained the situation while Jake listened with growing alarm that seemed genuine enough to fool anyone who didn't know him as well as I did. My brother possessed an uncanny ability to manufacture emotions when circumstances required them. During college, he had convinced professors, administrators, and even campus security officers that he was innocent of various infractions through nothing more than convincing performances. "Steve was working late Monday night," Jake said thoughtfully, as if the memory had just occurred to him. "I saw his car in the parking lot when I left around 9. He was still here when I came back around 11 to grab some blueprints I forgot." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I stared at my brother, searching his face for any hint that he was lying, but Jake maintained perfect eye contact with an expression of reluctant certainty. "That's not possible," I protested. I left the office at 6:30 Monday evening. I went straight home to my apartment and spent the evening watching basketball with my girlfriend, Amanda. Amanda worked as a marketing coordinator for a local real estate firm. We had been dating for 8 months, and I thought our relationship was solid. She was intelligent, ambitious, and seemed genuinely interested in building a future together. Her support had been crucial during the stressful early months of working for the family business, when Dad's demanding expectations and Jake's subtle undermining made every day feel like a battle. "Call Amanda," I suggested to my parents. "She'll confirm I was home Monday night." Dad dialed Amanda's number while the rest of us waited in uncomfortable silence. The conversation was brief, and I watched his expression grow increasingly skeptical as Amanda spoke. When he hung up, the disappointment in his eyes was unmistakable. "She says you left her apartment around 8:30 Monday night," Dad reported. "Told her you had to go back to the office to finish some urgent paperwork." The room seemed to spin around me. Amanda's words made no sense whatsoever. We had spent Monday evening on her couch sharing takeout Chinese food and arguing good-naturedly about whether the Lakers or the Bulls had the better championship legacy. I remembered every detail of that night because it was one of the few relaxing evenings we had enjoyed together in weeks. "That's completely wrong," I insisted. "I never went back to the office Monday night. Amanda knows that." Jake shook his head sadly. "Steve, I understand you're scared, but lying will only make things worse. I saw your car in the parking lot. I saw the lights on in the accounting office. Maybe you forgot, or maybe you're just embarrassed about whatever happened." My mother began crying softly, the sound cutting through me like broken glass. She had always been the emotional center of our family, quick to worry, and even quicker to assume the worst possible outcomes. Her tears meant she already believed Jake's version of events. "How could you do this to us?" she whispered. "To your own family?" The betrayal in her voice was devastating. After 2 years of dedicating myself to the family business, working longer hours than anyone else, and accepting lower pay than I could earn elsewhere, my own mother was ready to believe I would steal from them based on nothing more than Jake's testimony and Amanda's inexplicable lie. That afternoon, while I sat in my cubicle trying to process what was happening, my phone buzzed with a text message from Amanda. "We need to talk. Meet me at Miller's Cafe after work." Miller's Cafe was a small coffee shop downtown where Amanda and I had gone on our third date. The nostalgic location choice seemed ominous under the circumstances. I arrived to find her already seated in a corner booth, nervously stirring a latte she clearly had no intention of drinking. "I'm sorry about what I told your father," she began before I could even sit down. But I had to tell him what Jake asked me to say. The words hit me like ice water. "Jake asked you to lie." Amanda's composure cracked slightly. "He called me this morning before your dad did. He explained how the missing money was going to destroy your family's business unless someone took responsibility. He said you were planning to blame him and that the only way to protect everyone was if I confirmed you had gone back to the office Monday night. And you believed him." "He was very convincing," Amanda admitted. "He said you had confessed everything to him, but you were too proud to admit it to your parents. He made it sound like I was helping you by backing up his story." I stared at the woman I thought I knew, struggling to understand how she could be so easily manipulated by my brother's lies. "Amanda, I never confessed anything to Jake because there's nothing to confess. I didn't take that money." Her eyes filled with tears, but something in her expression seemed calculated rather than genuine. "I want to believe you, Steve. But Jake showed me some things that made his story seem very credible." "What things?" Amanda reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside were photocopies of financial documents that appeared to show irregular transactions processed under my login credentials. The paperwork looked official and damning, with my digital signature on transfer authorizations I had never seen before. "Jake said you had been embezzling money for months," Amanda explained. "He said the $15,000 was just the amount your father discovered, but there was much more missing from various accounts." My hands shook as I examined the forged documents. Jake had clearly invested significant time and effort into creating evidence that would support his accusations. The level of planning required suggested this wasn't a desperate last-minute scheme, but a carefully orchestrated setup that had been months in the making. "These are fake," I told Amanda. "Jake created these to frame me." But even as I spoke, I could see doubt growing in Amanda's eyes. Jake's evidence looked convincing to someone without detailed knowledge of our accounting systems. My protests of innocence sounded exactly like what a guilty person would say when confronted with proof of their crimes. That evening, I drove to my parents' house, hoping to find some way to convince them of my innocence. Instead, I discovered they had already changed the locks and installed a new security system. When I rang the doorbell, Dad answered, but kept the chain lock engaged, speaking to me through the narrow gap. "We can't have a thief living in our house," he said quietly. "Pack your belongings and find somewhere else to stay. We'll be pressing charges tomorrow morning." The finality in his voice destroyed any remaining hope I had of reasoning with my family. My own parents were casting me out based on Jake's lies and Amanda's betrayal without even attempting to investigate the truth. Within 12 hours of being kicked out of my childhood home, I found myself sitting across from Thomas Brady, a private investigator recommended by a lawyer friend from college. Brady operated out of a small office above a used bookstore, and his weathered appearance suggested decades of experience with cases like mine. His gray hair was military short, and his intense blue eyes seemed to catalog every detail of my story as I recounted the events of recent days. Family business disputes are tricky. Brady warned me after hearing the full story. Blood relations make people emotional and irrational. But if your brother is setting you up, there will be evidence to prove it. I paid Brady's $5,000 retainer with money from my emergency savings account funds I had been accumulating for a down payment on my first house. The irony of using my future home money to save my current reputation wasn't lost on me. Brady began his investigation by examining the financial documents Jake had shown Amanda. Within 2 days, he discovered that the digital signatures on the forged paperwork contained metadata errors that proved they had been created on Jake's personal laptop rather than through the company's secure accounting system. "Your brother made a critical mistake," Brady explained during our first progress meeting. "He used image editing software to recreate your digital signature, but he didn't understand how to properly falsify the embedded security codes that authenticate legitimate transactions." The technical evidence proving Jake's forgery was compelling, but Brady warned me it wasn't enough to convince my parents or clear my name publicly. We needed to establish Jake's motive for framing me and demonstrate his access to the stolen money. Brady's background investigation into Jake revealed disturbing information about my brother's secret life. Jake had been attending high-stakes poker games at an underground club called the Royal Flush, located in the basement of an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The games attracted wealthy businessmen, drug dealers, and other criminals who wagered amounts that would make most people dizzy with anxiety. "Your brother owes serious money to dangerous people," Brady reported. "I've identified at least 3 separate creditors who have been pressuring him for payment. The total debt appears to be somewhere around $80,000. The revelation explained Jake's desperate need for cash, but it also terrified me. Underground gambling operations rarely accepted payment plans or showed mercy to delinquent debtors. If Jake owed that much money to criminals, his life was probably in genuine danger. Brady also uncovered troubling information about Amanda's recent financial situation. Bank records obtained through a contact in the financial industry showed large cash deposits into her checking account over the past 2 months. The amounts were irregular, but substantial, always just under the $10,000 threshold that would trigger automatic federal reporting requirements. "She's been receiving payments from someone," Brady concluded. "The pattern suggests deliberate structuring to avoid detection. This isn't random income from her regular job." While Brady continued his investigation, I struggled to survive on my own for the first time since college. I rented a small studio apartment in a run-down complex across town, far from the comfortable suburban neighborhood where I'd grown up. The place smelled like cigarette smoke and cooking grease, and the neighbors seemed to argue constantly through the thin walls. My parents had frozen my access to the family business bank accounts and suspended my company credit cards, leaving me dependent on my personal savings and the small amount of cash I kept in my wallet. I applied for temporary work with other construction companies in the area, but word of the theft accusations had already spread through the industry's tight-knit community. We can't hire someone with financial integrity questions, explained the hiring manager at Davidson Construction. It's nothing personal, but we work with a lot of government contracts that require security clearances. Similar rejections came from every company I contacted. The construction industry in our county was surprisingly small, and my family's reputation had opened doors for me throughout my career. Now that same reputation was slamming those doors shut. After a week of failed job searches, I swallowed my pride and applied for a position at a fast food restaurant near my apartment. The manager, a tired-looking woman named Carol, hired me for the evening shift at minimum wage plus tips. The work was humiliating after years of managing six-figure budgets, but it provided enough income to cover my basic expenses. During my third week of exile, Brady called with devastating news about the depth of Jake's deception. His surveillance of my brother had revealed regular meetings between Jake and Amanda at various locations around town. They weren't just conspiring about the frame job, they were having an affair. I have photographs of them together at hotels, restaurants, and her apartment, Brady reported. The relationship appears to have been going on for at least 2 months, possibly longer. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Jake had done to me professionally. Amanda hadn't just lied to support his accusations. She had been sleeping with my brother while pretending to care about our relationship. Every intimate moment we had shared, every plan we had made together, had been contaminated by her deception. Brady's investigation also revealed that Jake had been using his access to the company's client database to identify potential targets for identity theft and credit card fraud. Several business owners who had worked with Morrison & Sons reported suspicious activity on their financial accounts after providing personal information for construction contracts. Your brother isn't just a gambling addict, Brady warned. He's a career criminal who's been using your family's business as a front for multiple illegal enterprises. The scope of Jake's crimes was staggering, but it also presented an opportunity to prove my innocence. If Brady could document Jake's other illegal activities, it would establish a pattern of behavior that made the embezzlement accusations more credible. Meanwhile, my parents had hired their own investigator to build a stronger case against me. Private investigators are required to be licensed and follow ethical guidelines. But the man my parents chose was known for aggressive tactics that sometimes crossed legal boundaries. Eugene Walsh had a reputation for finding whatever evidence his clients wanted to find regardless of its authenticity. Walsh began harassing my former coworkers at Morrison & Sons, pressuring them to provide statements supporting the case against me. Several employees called me privately to report Walsh's intimidation tactics, but they were too afraid for their own jobs to refuse cooperation publicly. He threatened to have me investigated by the IRS if I didn't sign a statement saying you had been acting suspicious lately, reported Jennifer, the office administrative assistant. I'm sorry, Steve, but I can't afford to get audited right now. Walsh also attempted to access my personal financial records through questionable means. My bank called to report that someone claiming to be a federal investigator had requested copies of my account statements and transaction history. Only quick thinking by the bank manager prevented the unauthorized release of my private information. The pressure from Walsh's investigation was taking a psychological toll on everyone connected to the situation. My former coworkers became paranoid and suspicious of each other, afraid that anything they said might be twisted into evidence against them. The toxic atmosphere at Morrison & Sons began affecting productivity and employee morale. After 3 weeks of Brady's investigation, we finally had enough evidence to request a meeting with the police detective handling my case. Detective Maria Santos worked in the Financial Crimes Unit and had been assigned to investigate the missing money after my parents filed their initial report. Detective Santos was a serious woman in her early 40s with short black hair and intelligent brown eyes. She listened carefully to Brady's presentation of evidence, asking detailed questions about the forged documents and Jake's gambling debts. This is compelling information, Santos acknowledged. But I need to warn you that family business disputes rarely result in criminal charges unless we can prove deliberate fraud beyond reasonable doubt. Brady handed her a thick folder containing photocopies of all his findings. Detective, we believe Jake Morrison has been embezzling money from his family's business for months. Not just the $15,000 that was initially reported. We also have evidence that he's been involved in identity theft and credit card fraud using information obtained through the construction company's client database. Santos promised to review Brady's evidence and conduct her own investigation into Jake's activities. However, she cautioned that the process could take several weeks, and there was no guarantee that criminal charges would be filed, even if the evidence supported our allegations. As Brady and I left the police station, I felt hopeful for the first time since the nightmare began. We had built a strong case proving Jake's guilt and my innocence, but I knew that convincing my parents would be much more difficult than satisfying a police detective. Jake had spent his entire life manipulating our parents' emotions and exploiting their favoritism. Even faced with overwhelming evidence of his crimes, they might choose to protect him rather than admit they had destroyed their relationship with their innocent son. That night, as I lay on the lumpy mattress in my studio apartment, I remembered something that might provide the final piece of evidence we needed to expose Jake's deception. 3 months earlier, concerned about petty cash that had been disappearing from the office, I'd secretly installed a small security camera above my desk that provided a clear view of the company's safe. The security camera I had installed was a tiny, wireless device, about the size of a quarter, designed for home security systems, but perfect for covert office surveillance. I had positioned it inside a fake smoke detector mounted on the ceiling above my desk, where it had an unobstructed view of the office safe and the surrounding work area. The camera transmitted footage to a hidden hard drive I kept locked in my desk drawer, programmed to record only when motion was detected in the target area. I had originally installed the system to catch whoever was stealing petty cash from our office supply fund, but I had completely forgotten about it during the chaos of recent weeks. Retrieving the hard drive would require returning to Morrison & Sons after hours when the building was empty and the alarm system was set. I still had my security access codes because Dad hadn't thought to revoke them yet, trusting that his threat of criminal prosecution would keep me away from the building. Brady offered to accompany me on the retrieval mission, but I decided the risk was too great for both of us to be caught breaking into the building. If security caught me alone, I could claim I was retrieving personal belongings. If they found both of us, it would look like premeditated burglary. I waited until 2 in the morning on a Tuesday night, when the commercial district around our office building would be completely deserted. The Morrison & Sons building was a modest 2-story structure Dad had purchased in 1995, with offices on the upper floor and storage space for equipment and materials on the ground level. My hands shook as I entered the security code at the rear entrance, half expecting alarms to sound and police cars to come racing into the parking lot. Instead, the familiar green light indicated that the system had accepted my access code and disarmed the motion sensors. The office felt eerie and unfamiliar in the darkness, filled with shadows and unfamiliar shapes. I used my cell phone's flashlight to navigate to my old desk, where the hidden hard drive waited in the locked bottom drawer. The device was slightly larger than a deck of cards, containing 3 months of motion-activated footage from the ceiling camera. As I prepared to leave with the evidence, curiosity compelled me to check Jake's office for any additional information that might support our case. His desk was unlocked, and the top drawer contained a collection of betting slips from the Royal Flush gambling operation. The amounts wagered were staggering, ranging from $5,000 to $20,000 per game. Jake had been gambling with money he didn't have, accumulating massive debts to people who wouldn't hesitate to use violence for collection. The betting slips were dated over the past 4 months, showing a clear escalation in both frequency and amount as his addiction spiraled out of control. Hidden behind a row of legal files in Jake's desk, I discovered a notebook containing detailed plans for framing me for the embezzlement. Jake had spent weeks studying our company's accounting system, identifying vulnerabilities he could exploit to make unauthorized transfers appear legitimate. The notebook contained my daily work schedule notes about my relationship with Amanda, and even observations about my personal habits and psychological weaknesses. Jake had been planning this setup for months, waiting for the perfect opportunity to execute his scheme. Most disturbing was a section labeled Contingency Plans that outlined what Jake would do if his initial frame attempt failed. He had considered planting drugs in my apartment, reporting me to the IRS for tax evasion, and even arranging for me to be arrested on false assault charges. The depth of Jake's malice was breathtaking. This wasn't just about stealing money to pay gambling debts. It was about destroying me completely to protect himself from the consequences of his own criminal behavior. I photographed every page of Jake's notebook with my cell phone before returning it to exactly where I'd found it. The documentation would provide crucial evidence of premeditation and malicious intent if criminal charges were ever filed. The next morning, Brady and I reviewed the security camera footage on his office computer. The video quality was surprisingly clear with timestamps and date stamps that would be admissible as evidence in court proceedings. The footage revealed Jake accessing the office safe on multiple occasions during the past 3 months, always during hours when he claimed to be out of the office on business calls or client meetings. The most damning video showed Jake opening the safe at 11:45 on Monday night, exactly the time he claimed to have seen me working late. "This is perfect," Brady said as we watched Jake count out stacks of cash from the company safe. "The timestamp proves he was lying about when he saw you in the office, and the footage shows him actually committing the theft he accused you of." But the security video revealed much more than just Jake's theft of company funds. On several occasions, the camera had captured Jake meeting with individuals who were clearly not legitimate business associates. These men wore expensive suits but carried themselves with the predatory confidence of professional criminals. One particularly damaging video showed Jake handing over client files from Morrison and Sons to one of these mysterious visitors. The files contained personal information about business owners who had hired our company for construction projects, including social security numbers, bank account information, and credit card details. "Your brother has been selling client information to identity theft rings," Brady concluded after analyzing the footage. "This goes way beyond gambling addiction. He's been running a sophisticated criminal enterprise using your family's business as cover." The evidence was overwhelming, but Brady warned me that presenting it to my parents would require careful strategy. Jake had spent years conditioning them to trust his word over mine, and they might refuse to believe video evidence that contradicted their favorite son's story. "We need to involve law enforcement first," Brady advised. "If Detective Santos arrests Jake based on this evidence, it will be harder for your parents to dismiss the charges as a family dispute." I called Detective Santos and arranged to deliver copies of the security footage to her office that afternoon. Santos watched the videos with growing amazement, taking detailed notes about timestamps and the identities of Jake's criminal associates. "This changes everything," Santos admitted. "What started as a simple embezzlement case is now looking like a multi-state identity theft operation with potential federal implications." Santos contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force and requested assistance with the expanded investigation. Federal agents had been tracking the identity theft ring for months, and Jake's security camera footage provided the first solid evidence connecting specific individuals to the criminal organization. "Your brother picked the wrong people to do business with," Santos warned. "The FBI has been building a RICO case against this organization for over 2 years. If Jake cooperates and provides testimony against the ringleaders, he might avoid federal prison. But if he continues lying and covering up his involvement, he's looking at decades behind bars." The next phase of the investigation moved quickly. Federal agents obtained warrants to search Jake's apartment, his car, and his personal bank accounts. They discovered additional evidence of identity theft, including stolen credit cards, fake driver's licenses, and sophisticated computer equipment used for creating fraudulent documents. Jake's apartment also contained evidence of his relationship with Amanda, including photographs, love letters, and expensive jewelry he had purchased for her using stolen money. The timeline of their affair corresponded exactly with the period when Jake had been planning to frame me for embezzlement. But the most shocking discovery came when investigators examined Jake's laptop computer. Hidden in encrypted files, they found detailed records of his criminal activities dating back over 2 years. Jake had been stealing from Morrison and Sons almost since the day he started working there, skimming small amounts from various accounts to avoid detection. The total amount of stolen money exceeded $200,000, not the $15,000 that had originally been reported. Jake had been careful to spread the thefts across multiple accounts and time periods, making the losses appear to be normal business fluctuations rather than deliberate embezzlement. Detective Santos called me with the news on Thursday afternoon. "Steve, you need to prepare yourself for some difficult conversations with your family. The evidence we've uncovered proves that your brother has been stealing from your parents' business for over 2 years, and the amount involved is much larger than anyone realized." I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness as the scope of Jake's betrayal became clear. My vindication came from knowing that I would be completely cleared of all accusations, but the sadness stemmed from understanding how devastated my parents would be when they learned the truth about their favorite son. But Detective Santos had even more shocking news to share. The investigation had revealed that my parents weren't entirely innocent victims in Jake's criminal scheme. Bank records showed that both Mom and Dad had been receiving regular cash payments from Jake's illegal activities money they had deposited into personal accounts separate from the business finances. "Your parents may have suspected that Jake was involved in illegal activities," Santos explained carefully. "The evidence suggests they chose to look the other way as long as they were benefiting financially from his crimes. Armed with overwhelming evidence of Jake's crimes and my complete innocence, I marched into the police station on Friday morning to confront my family as they prepared to file formal charges against me. Detective Santos had arranged for the meeting to take place in a conference room where she could present the security camera footage and explain the results of the federal investigation. My parents sat on one side of the long table looking older and more fragile than I remembered. Dad wore his best suit, the same one he reserved for important business meetings and court appearances. Mom clutched a tissue in her shaking hands, her eyes red and swollen from days of crying. Jake sat between them, projecting his usual confident demeanor, despite the devastating evidence mounting against him. He wore an expensive watch I had never seen before, and his designer clothes seemed inappropriate for someone supposedly concerned about family financial difficulties. Amanda was also present, having been subpoenaed as a material witness to the conspiracy. She sat as far from me as possible, avoiding eye contact and fidgeting nervously with her purse. Her once perfect appearance showed signs of stress, with dark circles under her eyes and fingernails bitten down to the quick. Detective Santos entered the conference room carrying a laptop computer and a thick folder of evidence. "Before we proceed with filing charges against Steve Morrison, there's new information that everyone needs to see." She connected her laptop to a large monitor mounted on the wall and began playing the security camera footage. The first video showed Jake opening the company safe on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks earlier, counting out large amounts of cash while checking his watch repeatedly. This footage was recorded by a hidden security camera that Steve installed to investigate missing petty cash from the office, Santos explained. The timestamp shows Jake Morrison accessing the company safe on multiple occasions during hours when he claimed to be out of the office. Dad's face went pale as he watched his favorite son stealing money from their family business. "There must be some mistake," he whispered. "Jake wouldn't steal from us." But the evidence continued mounting as Santos played additional videos showing Jake meeting with known criminals and handing over client files containing sensitive personal information. The final video was the most damaging, recorded at 11:45 on Monday night, when Jake had claimed to witness me working late in the office. "As you can see," Santos continued, "Jake Morrison was the person in the office on Monday night not Steve. He lied about seeing Steve there, and he stole the $15,000 that he later accused his brother of taking. Jake's confident facade finally cracked under the weight of irrefutable video evidence. "Those videos are fake," he protested desperately. "Steve must have created them with computer software to frame me." Detective Santos opened her folder and pulled out copies of Jake's notebook containing detailed plans for framing me. "We also found this in Jake's desk at Morrison & Sons. It contains extensive notes about how to manipulate the family and law enforcement into believing Steve was guilty of embezzlement." She read several passages aloud, including Jake's observations about my work schedule and his strategies for turning Amanda against me. The cold, calculating nature of his planning was evident in every carefully written word. Mom began sobbing as the reality of Jake's deception became undeniable. "How could you do this to your own brother?" she asked through her tears. But Jake's response revealed the depth of his narcissistic personality. "Steve has always been jealous of me," he said angrily. "This is his revenge for never being Dad's favorite." The accusation was so absurd and self-centered that even Dad seemed taken aback by Jake's complete lack of remorse or responsibility. Everything was always someone else's fault in Jake's twisted worldview. Detective Santos then delivered the most devastating blow of all. Jake Morrison is under federal investigation for his involvement with an organized identity theft ring. FBI agents have been tracking this criminal organization for 2 years, and Jake's security camera footage provides crucial evidence for their RICO prosecution. She explained how Jake had been selling client information from Morrison & Sons to professional criminals who used the data for credit card fraud and identity theft. The scope of his crimes extended far beyond simple embezzlement into serious federal felonies that carried decades of potential prison time. The total amount Jake has stolen from Morrison & Sons exceeds $200,000, Santos continued. He's been systematically embezzling money for over 2 years using sophisticated methods to avoid detection until the recent $15,000 theft. Dad stared at Jake in horror as the magnitude of betrayal became clear. His entire life's work building Morrison & Sons had been compromised by his own son's criminal activities. Decades of honest business relationships and community trust had been destroyed by Jake's greed and recklessness. But Detective Santos wasn't finished with her revelations. Bank records had revealed that my parents had been receiving regular cash payments from Jake's criminal activities money they had deposited into personal accounts while remaining willfully ignorant about its source. Robert and Linda Morrison have received approximately $60,000 in cash payments from Jake over the past 18 months, Santos reported. The money was deposited in amounts designed to avoid federal reporting requirements. The implication was clear: my parents had known or suspected that Jake was involved in illegal activities, but they had chosen to benefit financially rather than ask difficult questions about where the money was coming from. Dad's face turned red with embarrassment and rage. "We thought Jake was getting bonuses from successful business deals," he protested. "He told us he was earning commission payments from new contracts." But Santos had evidence that contradicted their claims of ignorance. Phone records showed multiple conversations between Jake and our parents immediately after his meetings with criminal associates. The timing suggested coordination and advanced planning rather than innocent gift-giving. At minimum, Robert and Linda Morrison will face charges for money laundering and conspiracy, Santos explained. The federal prosecutors haven't decided whether to pursue full criminal charges, but asset forfeiture is almost certain. The government would be seizing all money and property that could be traced to Jake's criminal activities, including the family home, the Morrison & Sons business assets, and my parents' personal bank accounts. Everything they had worked their entire lives to build would be gone. Amanda finally broke her silence as the weight of consequences became apparent. "Detective Santos, I want to make a full confession about my role in this conspiracy," she said in a shaking voice. She admitted to lying about my whereabouts on Monday night, but claimed Jake had threatened to expose embarrassing photographs if she didn't cooperate with his story. According to Amanda, Jake had been blackmailing her for weeks, with intimate images he had secretly recorded during their affair. He said he would send the photographs to my employer and my family if I didn't help him frame Steve. Amanda explained through tears. I was scared and ashamed, and I didn't know what else to do. But Detective Santos had evidence that contradicted Amanda's claims of being an unwilling victim. Bank records showed she had received over $30,000 in cash payments from Jake during their relationship money she had used to purchase luxury items and pay off credit card debts. Amanda Wilson was a willing participant in this conspiracy, Santos concluded. She'll be facing charges for perjury conspiracy and accessory to embezzlement. As the full scope of the conspiracy became clear, Jake made one final desperate attempt to shift blame away from himself. None of this would have happened if Steve hadn't been so incompetent at his job, he declared. I was trying to save the family business from his mistakes. The accusation was so ridiculous that even our parents couldn't pretend to take it seriously. Jake had systematically looted Morrison & Sons for over 2 years, while I had been working overtime to keep the company financially stable. Detective Santos stood up and signaled to 2 federal agents who had been waiting outside the conference room. Jake Morrison, you're under arrest for embezzlement, conspiracy, identity theft, and violation of federal racketeering statutes. As the agents handcuffed Jake and read him his rights, he continued protesting his innocence and blaming everyone else for the situation. His complete inability to accept responsibility for his own actions was perhaps the most damning evidence of his criminal mindset. The agents also arrested Amanda for her role in the conspiracy, though they allowed her to surrender voluntarily rather than being handcuffed in front of the family. Her cooperation with the federal investigation might result in reduced charges, but she would still face significant prison time. My parents weren't arrested that day, but Detective Santos made it clear that criminal charges were likely forthcoming. They would need to hire criminal defense attorneys and prepare for a lengthy legal battle that would probably result in the loss of everything they owned. As Jake and Amanda were led away in custody, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. The vindication was sweet after weeks of being accused of crimes I didn't commit, but seeing my family destroyed by Jake's actions brought no real satisfaction. Dad finally approached me as we prepared to leave the police station. Steve, I don't know how to apologize for what we put you through, he said quietly. We failed you as parents and we destroyed our family by believing Jake's lies. But the apology felt hollow after everything that had happened. My parents had chosen to believe the worst about me based on minimal evidence, while ignoring obvious signs of Jake's criminal behavior for years. Their favoritism and willful blindness had enabled Jake's crimes and made me a scapegoat for his actions. I accept your apology, I told Dad. But things can never go back to the way they were. Too much damage has been done for our relationship to ever fully recover. Jake's arrest triggered a cascade of legal consequences that destroyed everything our family had built over 3 generations. Within 48 hours of his federal indictment, government agents arrived at Morrison & Sons with warrants to seize all business assets, bank accounts, and company equipment as evidence in their racketeering investigation. The construction projects Morrison & Sons had been working on were suspended indefinitely, leaving subcontractors unpaid and clients scrambling to find replacement companies to complete their buildings. Decades of business relationships and community goodwill evaporated overnight as news of Jake's crimes spread through the construction industry. My parents hired criminal defense attorney Marcus Webb to represent them in the money laundering charges. Webb was a skilled lawyer with experience in federal white-collar cases, but he warned them that avoiding prison time would require full cooperation with prosecutors and forfeiture of all assets connected to Jake's crimes. The government has a strong case, Webb explained during their initial consultation. Your best option is to plead guilty to reduced charges and hope for probation instead of active prison sentences. The plea agreement would require my parents to forfeit their family home, all Morrison and Sons assets, and approximately $200,000 in personal savings that could be traced to Jake's criminal activities. They would be left with nothing except Social Security benefits, and whatever legitimate retirement funds remained untouched by the government seizure. Jake hired his own attorney, an expensive criminal defense specialist named Patricia Goldman, who was known for aggressive tactics and creative legal arguments. Goldman's strategy focused on portraying Jake as a gambling addict whose crimes were driven by mental illness rather than criminal intent. My client suffers from pathological gambling disorder, which is recognized as a legitimate mental health condition, Goldman argued at Jake's bail hearing. His actions were the result of impulse control problems, not deliberate criminal planning. But the federal prosecutor assistant United States Attorney David Chen had extensive evidence that contradicted Goldman's claims about Jake's mental state. The notebook found in Jake's desk showed months of careful planning and deliberate criminal conduct that was incompatible with impulse control disorder. Jake Morrison is a sophisticated criminal who spent 2 years systematically looting his family's business while maintaining an elaborate deception, Chen argued. His crimes were premeditated, calculated, and designed to destroy his innocent brother's reputation. The judge denied Jake's bail request, citing the extensive evidence of ongoing criminal activity and the risk that Jake would flee the jurisdiction if released. Jake would remain in federal custody until his trial, which was scheduled for early the following year. Amanda hired a public defender after her family refused to pay for private legal representation. Her attorney negotiated a plea agreement that would result in 2 years in federal prison and full restitution to the identity theft victims in exchange for her cooperation against Jake and the organized crime ring. Amanda Wilson was manipulated and coerced by Jake Morrison, her public defender argued. She's willing to testify fully about the conspiracy and help the government build its case against the more culpable defendants. While my family's legal troubles unfolded, I began the difficult process of rebuilding my life and career. The security camera evidence had completely vindicated me, but the months of false accusations had destroyed my reputation in the local construction industry. Thomas Brady helped me document all the damages I had suffered as a result of Jake's conspiracy, including lost wages, damaged reputation, and emotional distress. The documentation would support civil lawsuits against Jake, Amanda, and potentially my parents for their role in the false accusations. You have strong grounds for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy claims, Brady advised. The challenge will be collecting any judgment since most of the defendant's assets will be seized by the government. I also received an unexpected phone call from Detective Santos with news that would change everything about my future prospects. The federal investigation had revealed that Morrison and Sons had been on the verge of winning a massive government contract worth $12 million over 3 years. The General Services Administration wants to award the contract to a qualified construction company with strong financial management and security protocols, Santos explained. Your work maintaining Morrison and Sons' legitimate operations impressed them, and they're interested in discussing the contract with you personally. The government contract represented an opportunity to start my own construction company using the knowledge and relationships I had developed during my years at Morrison and Sons. Many of our best employees had been laid off when the business was seized, and several had already contacted me about potential employment opportunities. I used my remaining savings to incorporate Morrison Construction LLC, a new company that would compete directly with the remnants of my family's former business. The name choice was deliberate. I wanted to preserve the Morrison legacy, while separating it from Jake's crimes and my parents' poor judgment. Within 2 weeks of incorporating the new company, I had signed employment contracts with 6 former Morrison and Sons employees, including our best project managers and most skilled construction supervisors. These were people who had worked with me for years and trusted my integrity, despite the recent false accusations. The General Services Administration conducted extensive background checks before awarding the federal contract, but the investigation actually worked in my favor. The security camera footage and federal criminal charges against Jake provided clear evidence that I had been falsely accused and completely vindicated. Steve Morrison demonstrated exceptional integrity by installing security systems to prevent theft and cooperating fully with federal investigators. The GSA contracting officer noted in her report, his actions during the crisis showed exactly the kind of financial responsibility and ethical behavior we require in government contractors. The contract award was announced in the local newspaper along with details about Jake's federal indictment and the seizure of Morrison & Sons assets. The article portrayed me as an innocent victim who had been wrongfully accused by his criminal brother, helping to rehabilitate my reputation in the business community. But the most shocking revelation came when Detective Santos called with additional information about my parents' involvement in Jake's crimes. The federal investigation had discovered that Dad had been planning to sell Morrison & Sons and retire, cutting me out of the inheritance entirely while giving everything to Jake. Your parents had already contacted business brokers about selling the company, Santos reported. The plan was to retire to Florida and leave Jake in control of the business operations. You weren't going to inherit anything. The discovery documents showed that my parents had been planning this betrayal for over a year long before the embezzlement accusations. They had been meeting secretly with financial advisors and real estate agents while pretending to value my contributions to the family business. They were going to give Jake full ownership of Morrison & Sons as an early inheritance, Santos continued. The embezzlement scheme might have been Jake's way of accelerating that timeline by eliminating you from consideration. The revelation was devastating, but also liberating. I'd spent years working for below-market wages and sacrificing personal opportunities because I believed I was building something that would eventually be mine. Learning that my parents had never intended to include me in their legacy plans eliminated any remaining guilt about competing against the family business. During Jake's detention hearing, federal prosecutors revealed additional details about the scope of his criminal activities. The identity theft ring he had been working with was responsible for over $5 million in fraudulent charges affecting hundreds of victims across multiple states. Jake Morrison provided client information that enabled the criminal organization to target high-net-worth individuals with sophisticated financial profiles, Prosecutor Chen explained. His position at Morrison & Sons gave the ring access to wealthy business owners who were particularly attractive targets for identity theft. The victims included several prominent local business leaders who had hired Morrison & Sons for construction projects over the years. Learning that their personal information had been compromised by Jake's criminal activities destroyed any remaining goodwill the Morrison family name might have retained in the community. One particularly damaging revelation involved the mayor's office renovation project that Morrison & Sons had completed the previous year. Jake had stolen the mayor's social security number and bank account information, which was later used to obtain fraudulent credit cards and loans. The breach of public trust goes beyond simple embezzlement, Chen argued. Jake Morrison violated the security of elected officials and endangered public confidence in government operations. The political implications were enormous, as several city council members demanded investigations into all contracts awarded to Morrison & Sons over the past 5 years. The scandal threatened to become a major issue in upcoming municipal elections. As the federal case against Jake developed, I received a phone call from an unexpected source. Patricia Goldman, Jake's defense attorney, wanted to discuss a potential plea agreement that would require my cooperation and testimony. My client is willing to plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for full cooperation with the federal investigation, Goldman explained. But the prosecutors want victim impact statements from family members who were harmed by his actions. I agreed to meet with Goldman and the federal prosecutors to discuss my potential testimony. The victim impact statement would give me an opportunity to explain how Jake's conspiracy had affected my life, career, and relationships. But more importantly, my testimony would help ensure that Jake received an appropriate sentence for his crimes. The federal sentencing guidelines called for 12 to 15 years in prison, but cooperation with prosecutors could reduce that to as little as 5 years. The government wants Jake to testify against the leaders of the identity theft ring, explained Prosecutor Chen. His cooperation could help us dismantle the entire criminal organization and prevent future victims. As I prepared my victim impact statement, I reflected on how Jake's betrayal had actually strengthened my character and determination. Being falsely accused had taught me valuable lessons about self-reliance, the importance of evidence, and the need to trust my own instincts even when everyone else doubted me. 6 months after Jake's arrest, my new construction company had grown beyond my wildest expectations. The federal contract provided a solid foundation, but word-of-mouth referrals from satisfied clients had generated additional projects worth over $2 million in total value. Morrison Construction LLC employed 15 people, including several former Morrison and Sons workers who had been laid off when the government seized the family business. Working with trusted colleagues who knew my character and work ethic made the daily operations much more enjoyable than they had ever been under my father's demanding management style. The company operated out of a modern office building across town from the old Morrison & Sons location, which remained sealed with federal seizure notices while the government sorted through evidence for Jake's trial. I had deliberately chosen a different part of town to establish my independence from the family business legacy. My personal life had also improved dramatically since cutting ties with the toxic relationships that had dominated my previous existence. Living alone in a decent apartment gave me space to process the emotional trauma of recent months without the constant pressure of family expectations and manipulation. I had started dating Sarah Mitchell, a criminal defense attorney who had provided legal advice during the early stages of my vindication process. Sarah was intelligent, honest, and completely different from Amanda in every positive way. She understood the legal complexities of my situation and provided emotional support without the drama and deception that had characterized my previous relationship. You're lucky to have survived Jake's conspiracy with your reputation intact, Sarah observed during one of our dinner conversations. Many innocent people would have been destroyed by that level of coordinated deception. Sarah's perspective helped me understand that my survival and eventual triumph wasn't just luck, but the result of careful documentation, strategic thinking, and refusing to accept false accusations even when everyone around me believed them. Meanwhile, Jake's gambling debts had come due while he remained in federal custody awaiting trial. The dangerous criminals he owed money to began pressuring my parents for payment, not understanding or caring that Jake's arrest had eliminated their access to stolen funds. 3 men in expensive suits visited my parents' modest apartment one evening, making it clear that they expected full payment of Jake's $80,000 gambling debt, regardless of his legal situation. Dad called me in panic, begging for help, with creditors who had threatened violence if they didn't receive their money within 2 weeks. They said they know where we live and where we shop, Dad explained nervously. These aren't the kind of people who accept payment plans or excuses. I felt no obligation to help my parents escape consequences they had brought on themselves through years of enabling Jake's criminal behavior. They had chosen to benefit financially from his illegal activities while remaining willfully ignorant about the source of their extra income. You'll need to contact the FBI about threats from organized crime figures, I advised Dad. But don't expect me to pay gambling debts that Jake accumulated while he was framing me for embezzlement. The federal agents investigating Jake's case were very interested in the threats against my parents since they provided additional evidence of Jake's connections to organized crime. The agents arranged for my parents to enter a witness protection program until Jake's trial was completed and the criminal organization was dismantled. But the protection came with a price. My parents had to forfeit their remaining assets and relocate to a different state under new identities. Everything they had worked for during their entire lives was gone, and they would spend their remaining years as government dependents living under assumed names. The irony was not lost on me that my parents, who had been so concerned about protecting Jake from consequences, were now facing the most severe consequences of all. Their favoritism and moral blindness had destroyed not only their relationship with me, but their entire way of life. During the same period, Amanda was serving her 2-year federal sentence at a minimum security prison for women in another state. Her cooperation with prosecutors had resulted in the reduced sentence, but she would still face significant challenges rebuilding her life after release. Amanda's family had disowned her after learning about her affair with Jake and her role in framing me for embezzlement. Her former employer had fired her immediately after her arrest, and her professional reputation in marketing was permanently destroyed. I occasionally wondered whether Amanda felt genuine remorse for her actions, or simply regretted getting caught in Jake's conspiracy. Her letters of apology seemed calculated to generate sympathy rather than expressing authentic understanding of the harm she had caused. The federal trial of Jake and his criminal associates was scheduled to begin 8 months after his arrest. Prosecutor David Chen had built an extensive case using the security camera footage, financial records, and testimony from cooperating witnesses, including Amanda. This will be one of the largest identity theft prosecutions in federal court history, Chen explained during a pre-trial conference. Jake Morrison's cooperation has been crucial in identifying the leaders of the criminal organization. Jake's plea agreement called for 8 years in federal prison in exchange for his testimony against the identity theft ring. Patricia Goldman had negotiated the reduced sentence by emphasizing Jake's cooperation and his alleged gambling addiction, though the mental health defense had limited effectiveness given the evidence of premeditation. As part of the plea agreement, Jake was required to provide a full accounting of all money he had stolen and help authorities recover assets that could be returned to victims. The total amount of theft and fraud exceeded $800,000 when all of his criminal activities were calculated. But Jake would also face civil lawsuits from identity theft victims, Morrison and Sons clients whose information had been compromised, and potentially from me for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The civil liability would follow him for decades after his release from prison. The most satisfying development came when the General Services Administration offered Morrison Construction, LLC, an additional contract worth $18 million over 5 years. The new contract was for renovating federal courthouse buildings across 3 states, representing the kind of prestige project that Morrison and Sons had competed for unsuccessfully during my father's management. Your company's performance on the initial contract has been exceptional, the GSA contracting officer explained. The quality of work adherence to schedules and financial management have exceeded all expectations. The contract award ceremony was held at the federal courthouse downtown with local media coverage highlighting how I had overcome false accusations to build a successful business. The story provided a stark contrast to ongoing news coverage of Jake's criminal trial and my parents' financial ruin. Several former Morrison and Sons clients contacted me directly to request construction services, having learned about my vindication and new business success. These were people who had known and trusted me for years, but who had been hesitant to maintain contact during the embezzlement accusations. "We always believed in your integrity," explained Janet Reynolds, whose office building Morrison and Sons had renovated 2 years earlier. "We're glad to see you've overcome your family's problems and started fresh with your own company. The client relationships I rebuilt were based on personal merit rather than family connections, making them more meaningful and sustainable than the inherited goodwill I had relied on while working for Morrison and Sons. As Jake's trial date approached, I completed my victim impact statement for the federal sentencing hearing. The document detailed how his conspiracy had affected every aspect of my life, from my career prospects to my personal relationships to my mental health during months of false accusations. Jake Morrison's crimes went far beyond simple embezzlement, I wrote. His deliberate attempt to destroy his innocent brother's reputation was a calculated act of cruelty that caused psychological trauma lasting long after the criminal charges were resolved. The victim impact statement would be read aloud during Jake's sentencing hearing, giving me an opportunity to confront him directly about the consequences of his actions. After months of feeling powerless while others decided my fate, I would finally have a voice in determining Jake's punishment. But more importantly, I had already achieved the best possible revenge against Jake's betrayal, building a successful life and business that exceeded anything I could have accomplished while working under our parents' favoritism and enabling of his criminal behavior. Morrison Construction LLC was thriving. My relationship with Sarah was developing into something meaningful and healthy, and my reputation in the business community had been completely rehabilitated. Jake's attempt to destroy me had ultimately freed me to achieve greater success than ever before. As I prepared for the trial and sentencing proceedings, I reflected on how being falsely accused had actually been a blessing in disguise. The experience had taught me to rely on my own judgment, document everything carefully, and never trust family loyalty to overcome clear evidence of wrongdoing. Jake would spend the next 8 years in federal prison, followed by decades of civil liability and a permanently destroyed reputation. Amanda would struggle to rebuild her life after release from prison, but would never regain the trust and opportunities she had sacrificed for a few months of excitement and easy money. My parents would live out their remaining years in poverty and obscurity, having lost everything they built during 40 years of marriage and hard work. Their favoritism toward Jake had cost them not only their relationship with me, but their financial security, their home, and their place in the community they had called home for decades. But I had emerged from the crisis stronger, more successful, and more confident than ever before. Jake's betrayal had been intended to destroy me, but it had actually revealed strengths and capabilities I never knew I possessed. 2 years after Jake's sentencing, I stood in the executive conference room of Morrison Construction LLC, looking out at the bustling construction site where my crew was completing the new federal courthouse renovation. The project was ahead of schedule and under budget, exactly the kind of performance that had made my company one of the most respected construction firms in the region. The business had grown to employ 42 people across multiple project sites, with contracts worth over $30 million in total value. The company specialized in government and commercial projects that required the highest levels of financial accountability and security clearance, exactly the kind of work that my experience with federal investigations had prepared me to handle exceptionally well. Sarah and I had been married for 6 months, with a small ceremony attended by close friends and colleagues, rather than the large family gathering I had once imagined for my wedding day. Sarah's legal expertise had been invaluable in building Morrison Construction's compliance systems and contract procedures, ensuring that we operated with the transparency and integrity that government clients demanded. Jake had served 18 months of his 8-year federal sentence when he was attacked by other inmates who learned about his cooperation with prosecutors. The assault left him with permanent injuries and a medical transfer to a minimum security facility where he would serve the remainder of his time in protective custody. His letters of apology arrived sporadically, always timed to coincide with parole hearing dates or requests for financial assistance from prison. The messages followed a predictable pattern of self-pity mixed with hollow promises of redemption that never acknowledged the full scope of harm he had caused. "I've learned so much about myself during my time here," Jake wrote in his most recent letter. I understand now that my gambling addiction made me do terrible things to people I loved. I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me and maybe help me get back on my feet when I'm released. The letter joined dozens of others in a box. I kept locked away evidence of Jake's continuing inability to accept genuine responsibility for his actions. Even after losing everything, he still viewed himself as a victim of circumstances rather than the architect of his own destruction. Amanda had been released from prison after serving 20 months of her 2-year sentence. Her attempts to rebuild her life had been largely unsuccessful, as the identity theft convictions made her unemployable in marketing or any position requiring financial responsibility. She worked part-time jobs while pursuing an online degree in social work, hoping to eventually help other women avoid the mistakes she had made. Her own letter had arrived on the anniversary of Jake's arrest, containing what seemed like genuine remorse for her role in the conspiracy. "I know nothing I say can undo the pain I caused you," Amanda wrote. "But I want you to know that not a day passes without me regretting my choices and wishing I could have been the person you deserve." Unlike Jake's manipulative messages, Amanda's letter felt authentic in its acknowledgement of responsibility and harm. While I had no interest in resuming any kind of relationship with her, I appreciated her honesty about the consequences of her actions. My parents had struggled in their witness protection relocation, finding it difficult to adjust to life under new identities in an unfamiliar community. Dad's construction skills were transferable, but at 68 years old, he could only find part-time work that paid a fraction of what he had earned as a business owner. Mom's health had declined significantly under the stress of financial insecurity and social isolation. The community ties and friendships that had sustained her throughout her adult life were gone, replaced by the artificial relationships of people who knew her only by her assumed name and fabricated personal history. Their monthly phone calls were awkward conversations filled with careful language designed to avoid triggering federal monitoring systems. They asked about my business success with a mixture of pride and regret, understanding that I had achieved everything they had once hoped Jake would accomplish. "We're proud of what you've built," Dad said during our most recent conversation. "And we know we have no right to ask for anything after what we put you through." The admission was probably the closest thing to a genuine apology I would ever receive from my parents. While I maintained minimal contact out of basic human decency, I felt no obligation to provide the financial support they occasionally hinted about needing. Detective Maria Santos had been promoted to supervise the Financial Crimes Unit, largely based on her successful handling of the Morrison family case and its connection to the broader identity theft investigation. She occasionally called with updates about the ongoing prosecution of other members of the criminal organization. The last of Jake's associates was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Santos reported during her most recent call, "The entire identity theft ring has been dismantled, and the total recovery for victims exceeded $6 million. The success of the federal prosecution had made Santos something of a local celebrity in law enforcement circles, and she often spoke at conferences about the importance of financial crime investigation techniques. My security camera footage had become a case study in how private individuals could assist law enforcement while protecting their own interests. Thomas Brady had transitioned from private investigation to corporate security consulting with Morrison Construction LLC as one of his primary clients. His experience with the federal investigation had opened doors to contracts with other government contractors who needed sophisticated security systems and background investigation services. "Your case taught me that family business disputes can be the most complex investigations of all," Brady reflected during one of our quarterly security reviews. "People's emotions make them blind to obvious evidence, especially when it contradicts their preconceived beliefs about family members." Brady's insight had proven valuable as Morrison Construction grew and hired new employees. His background investigation services ensured that we never repeated the mistake of trusting people based on relationships rather than verified credentials and character references. The federal courthouse renovation project was scheduled for completion in 3 months, and the General Services Administration had already approached me about additional contracts worth over $50 million in total value. Morrison Construction had established a reputation for integrity and excellence that opened doors throughout the government contracting community. But the most meaningful recognition came from the local Construction Industry Association, which presented me with an award for ethical business practices and community leadership. The ceremony was attended by many of the same people who had shunned me during the embezzlement accusations, now eager to associate themselves with my success. Steve Morrison exemplifies the highest standards of our profession, the association president announced. His integrity under pressure and his commitment to excellence have set an example for all of us. The award represented complete rehabilitation of my reputation and validation of the principles I had maintained throughout the darkest period of my life. Standing at the podium, accepting the recognition, I thought about how far I had traveled from that day when I packed my belongings while police officers waited in our family home. During my acceptance speech, I shared the lessons that Jake's betrayal had taught me about the importance of character evidence and self-reliance. Success built on lies and manipulation is always temporary, I told the audience. But success built on integrity and hard work creates a foundation that can never be shaken. The speech was recorded and later used in the association's training materials for young construction professionals, ensuring that my experience would help others avoid similar traps and betrayals. As I reflected on the journey from false accusation to business success, I realized that Jake had actually given me the greatest gift possible by forcing me to discover my own strength and capability. His attempt to destroy me had revealed talents and determination I never knew I possessed. Morrison Construction LLC employed several young people who reminded me of myself at that age, hardworking, honest, and eager to build something meaningful with their lives. I made sure to mentor them carefully, sharing both technical knowledge and life lessons about maintaining integrity under pressure. Remember that your character is the only thing that truly belongs to you, I told new employees during their orientation. Everything else can be taken away, but your integrity and work ethic will carry you through any crisis. One young project manager named David reminded me particularly of my younger self. He was smart, dedicated, and came from a family that didn't always appreciate his talents. I took special care to provide him with opportunities to grow and develop, ensuring that he would never face the kind of betrayal and false accusations that had nearly destroyed my own career. "Thank you for believing in me when my own family doesn't," David said, after I promoted him to supervise his first major project. "It means everything to have someone recognize what I'm trying to accomplish." His gratitude reminded me of how important it was to use my success to help others avoid the pitfalls I had experienced. Morrison Construction wasn't just a business. It was a community of people committed to building something better than what they had inherited. The final chapter of Jake's story came when he was denied parole after serving his minimum sentence. The parole board cited his lack of genuine remorse and his continued attempts to minimize responsibility for his crimes as reasons for keeping him incarcerated. Jake Morrison continues to view himself as a victim of circumstances rather than accepting responsibility for the deliberate harm he caused to family members and identity theft victims, the parole board explained in their written decision. Jake would serve his full 8-year sentence, followed by 3 years of supervised release and decades of financial restitution obligations. His criminal record would follow him for the rest of his life, making meaningful employment and normal relationships nearly impossible to achieve. But I no longer thought about Jake with anger or resentment. His betrayal had been the catalyst for everything good that had happened in my life since that terrible day when I was falsely accused of theft. Without his conspiracy, I would still be working for my parents' business, earning less than my potential, and living under their conditional approval. Jake's attempt to destroy me had actually freed me to become the person I was always meant to be: an independent business owner, a loving husband, and a leader in my community. His greatest act of malice had become my greatest opportunity for growth. As I prepared to close Morrison Construction's most profitable year in company history, I felt grateful for the hard lessons that had shaped my character and revealed my true capabilities. Sometimes the people who hurt us most end up giving us the greatest gift of all: the motivation to become stronger than we ever thought possible. True family isn't about blood relations or inherited obligations. It's about loyalty, trust, and mutual support through good times and bad. The people who stood by me during the false accusations earned my lifelong gratitude and respect, while those who betrayed me lost any claim to my time or concern. Or, success built on your own merit is infinitely more valuable than anything handed to you by others. The business I built from nothing meant more to me than inheriting Morrison and Sons ever could have, because every achievement represented my own hard work and integrity, rather than family connections or inherited advantages. Today, as I watch another crew of Morrison construction workers building something that will stand for generations, I'm reminded that the strongest foundations come from the most challenging circumstances. Jake thought he was burying me, but he was actually planting the seeds of everything I would eventually accomplish. Have you ever faced a situation where family betrayal forced you to discover strengths you didn't know you had? The comments section below this story have become a community where people share their own experiences of overcoming false accusations and family betrayal. I read every single comment, and I'm constantly amazed by the resilience and determination that people show when facing their darkest moments. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming adversity and building success from unexpected circumstances. And please share this video with anyone who might benefit from hearing about how the worst betrayal can sometimes lead to the greatest triumph. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that your character and determination are the only things that truly belong to you. Everything else is temporary, but integrity and hard work will carry you through any storm. I hope your own journey leads to the same kind of strength and success that emerged from my darkest hour.